Okay, so this is a slightly different episode. We're doing a bonus episode because there's something that we feel like we need to talk about.
Yeah.
By way of background for everyone, last weekend we were away doing our live show. And while we were away, the tragedy that unfolded at Bondi Junction
At Westfield. Yeah.
at Westfield took place. And we had two shows over the weekend. And you're a little bit removed from the outside world when you're on tour. You're so consumed with what you're doing. But I sort of noticed something had happened. And whenever I got on Instagram, I'd see Penny, my wife, Penny does some really great posts around looking at what it's like to be a female in Australia right now.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, 58 women were killed by their partner or former partner. Every 9 days, a woman in Australia is killed by a partner or former partner. 13 women a day in Australia are hospitalised by their partner or former partner.
Yeah, I think that was as of like 21, 22.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. And Penny does some really good Instagram story. Anyone following Penny will know that she does some really great posts around it. And I read them all the time. I see them all the time and I always think good on her for doing that. That's really good. But Penny and I have never talked about what's happening in Australia right now with what it's like to be a woman in Australia. We've never had the discussion, even though I see her doing these posts about men's violence against women, whether that's violence from a partner in a relationship or whether it's an unknown attacker, these awful things we hear about in the news, or just the overwhelming sense of a woman feeling unsafe when she's in public. And she sent me a message on Sunday night while we were away, and it just said, I need to bring something up with you. I don't understand why you never talked about what's happening right now in Australia with these horrific murders that are taking place. Why do we never discuss this? Do you ever talk about it with your friends? And it was sort of like a flurry of messages that she sent through, and I immediately felt very defensive. And for some weird reason, I started saying, I do heaps of stuff in the community we're trying to teach boys empathy in primary schools, and Ryan, Josh and I are trying to show us ways to have conversation as men about certain things. And she said, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that it is terrifying being a woman in Australia right now. And she said, I don't feel like I can go for a run anymore. I don't feel like I can go to the shopping centre anymore. And my defensiveness changed very quickly when I realised the day before I got 2 phone calls in a row from numbers I didn't recognise. And both times I had this panic of something's happened to Penny, both times. So it's clearly entered my conscious at some point that right now there's a lot going on. But she made a really good point, and that is that, first of all, Penny and I talk about a lot of things. We've never talked about that. And I never have talked to my friends, my male friends, about this topic of the fucking horrific stuff that is happening around Australia and has done for a while now. So Penny told me in her WhatsApp groups right now, all the conversations, all the all-female groups she's in, it's all, they want to know why men aren't discussing this. Why aren't men talking about this? Why aren't men taking a stand? My first thought was, well, we don't talk about heavy stuff. But that's not entirely true. We do have the capacity to talk about heavy stuff when an issue concerns us. I think it's just the fact it's so wrapped up in privilege, the privilege of it's not top of mind because we don't have to worry about it every single day, that perhaps that's why it doesn't come up. But the other reason might be just that men are thinking, well, I wouldn't do that. I definitely don't do that.
It doesn't concern me.
So it doesn't concern me. So this is not really an issue for me and my male friends. So we're not part of the problem. And she said, is there some kind of bro code going that I don't know about? Like, is there that we don't know about? Is it like you're not meant to say anything or what? And I was, again, got defensive. And I said, no, of course there's not. Definitely not. There's no way that's the case. And she said, but I'm telling you right now, that's what it feels like. I just feel like it's genuinely frightening being female right now. And I don't really know how the other half of the male population feel about this because no one says anything. So I got home the next day and it was the first thing when the kids had gone to bed that we talked about. We talked about it for quite a long time. And I guess to hear there's genuine like fear in her voice around how she feels about stepping out of the house every single day. And it's just, I think what I wanted to do today really was just the three of us talk about men's violence against women. And it will be an imperfect chat, I guarantee that. But that's we just want to have a conversation about it. And I guess the hope is that potentially men will talk about it with their mates because they'll understand why it's important. And also, it would be great if, off the back of this conversation, men might ask their partners how they're feeling right now, because I think that would mean a lot to their partners or to the women in their life more generally. This is not, we're not trying to give people advice or try and create some policy change here. We just, I think, want to have a conversation as men around what's happening right now in Australia.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also like to broaden it to what's always happened.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah. Because I don't know enough about the issue to know how much worse it is now than it's ever been, but it's always been appalling, I think. Yeah, I think this probably speaks more to what it is to be there's many differences, but what it is to be a male like myself, in that I was unaware, really. I've switched off. I don't have social media anymore, and I'm really not looking at the news very much, and I didn't find out about what happened in Bondi Junction until Soph brought it up with me when I got home on Sunday. And so I've had my head in the sand, I think, a little bit on this issue of late, which I think says more about, that's just a perfect example of what it's like to be a guy, because I don't have to worry about it the way Penny was talking about it. But what I found interesting is that when Soph told me about what happened in Bondi Junction, I didn't hear many details, but it didn't even occur to me as a first thing to ask her how she was feeling about the whole situation. I didn't know the details of that have now come to light. The fact that it was almost solely women that were killed. And I'm sure, as with anything, there's going to be arguments about motivations. And obviously, in a case like this, their mental ill health is going to be a factor. But I think the fact remains that because of this man's actions, 5 women are dead. And it just adds to the staggering toll of women being murdered this year. And it's just another reminder that they're never quite free of that fear of violence. But the very fact that I didn't even think to ask Soph how it made her feel, and then it didn't prompt a further discussion of the other murders that I have heard about this year that women were targeted in, and the fact that I know intellectually that this is a huge problem. But I think it's telling that I didn't think to go down that path of a conversation with Soph. Yeah.
Yeah, it's to be honest, it's like I don't really know what to say, and I don't want to cop out on that, and it's because I was the same. I didn't think to ask Jam about how it made her feel. I didn't think that would be, because it was tragic, but there's tragedy every day. There's tragedy in the news every day, and it's shocking. But I guess what I failed to see was that event, or any event like it, where a woman is killed or put in hospital or something like that. It's what I probably failed to see was that it was like part of like this bigger problem, not just an isolated tragedy, but it's part of a bigger problem, which maybe I'm speaking very generally, but maybe many of us thought we kind of like dealt with during Me Too, or like thought like, well, we did the Me Too thing. I know that is, it's not necessarily like, no one's actually necessarily saying that, but maybe there's like a,
aren't things getting better sort of feeling?
Things getting better? Yeah. But to be honest, like even just when we were talking now, and it only like I got kind of like suddenly really like sort of scared and sad about the thought of like Jam, of something happening, because you just think, and I'm touching wood, as I say this, but uses the natural thing to think, which is that, well, that wouldn't happen to anyone. Like nothing like that would happen to anyone that I know. Because it's like, it can't like, but it does. It obviously does. And like the randomness of all of, like, particularly the Westfield thing, the randomness of that proves that it can just happen. It just happened. There doesn't have to be any, to think that like Jam could be just walking, which she often just does, walking by herself, whether it be dark or not, or whatever we think is safe or not safe. To think that just because she's a woman, that something bad could happen. Really, just as I was just sitting here before and you guys were talking, I got a little bit like I guess scared, and maybe it's not something that I've ever really had to worry about, because I've been so absolutely and lucky is the right word, completely lucky that I haven't had to face anything like that before. And I'm got no doubt that the moment you do have to face like something like that, it's like, okay, well, now it's all you think about. And I know that one of the things that we all learnt during Me Too is that women are constantly thinking about this. They are constantly thinking about being safe or not safe. It's not a safe world. It doesn't feel like it. But for us three men, it does often feel very safe, and we have no reason to think otherwise.
The amount of things I've done in the last week that Penny can't do. I mean, things like going for a run at night time because I didn't have a chance during the day, or it's walking the dog at night, or it's getting up and being out of the house early in the morning, whatever it is. Or even just walking. Like I remember you giving me an example earlier on about like Jam explaining that, like, if you're walking behind a female to cross the road, like,
well, this is one of the many things that I learnt during Me Too, which is that I didn't think it would be a problem if there's like a quiet street and there's a woman walking ahead of me and I'm walking behind her, just by chance. I didn't think that would be an issue, but Jam's like, oh no, you should definitely cross the road and not be walking behind her, because she could get nervous or worried or scared, because
That's the kind thing to do.
that's the kind thing to do. You have to be considerate and just don't walk behind her. And since she's told me that, I've noticed so many times that I just happen to be walking behind a woman and she will stop and like pretend to be held up for some reason and wait for me to pass.
Ah.
And then, because clearly she doesn't feel safe, not because she could see it was me, just because it was a man behind her. And I reckon, like, just even thinking about that from like a man's point of view, thinking about the fact that so often women just don't feel safe when us as men would think, you've got every reason to feel, there's nothing going on, there's nothing wrong. But I think it's worth mentioning, it's not just the big things, it's not just men killing women or raping or any of these sorts of really, really traumatic big things. It's the fact that there are so many like little micro moments happening. And I just think it's worth mentioning these, because I reckon a lot of men would listen to this and go like, well, I'm not that bad. I would never kill anyone. I would never, physically abuse a woman. But the way that men often treat women in very micro ways has an effect. And I know this from speaking to Jam about it a lot. It's like the little things like wolf whistles, which happen. And it's not a little thing, but it's like the things that do happen. It's just men looking at women. Even just that, if you imagine how that makes a woman feel, like if you're in a cafe and a woman walks in and you look at her multiple times and she's already in a place in life where she feels unsafe and she doesn't trust men all the time, it's the collective nature of all those things which adds to her level of feeling unsafe. And so I just wanted to mention that, because I just think it's very easy for us as men to hear these stories and to hear these things and go like, well, that's not me, I'm not that bad, and my friends aren't that bad. But the reality probably is that we all know men who contribute in this way.
Contribute to a general feeling of unsafeness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no malice intended by men, but it's just sort of us as men needing to think like, how are these actions, how's this behavior, how is it making this random woman feel?
I guess it's like little moments of like, it's just sort of disrespectful kind of
Yeah.
behavior, things like talking over women and little things like that where you might not even notice you're doing it, but they are small reminders, small daily reminders to a woman that men, yeah, I mean, that's the first one I thought of for some reason, just when you talk over a woman or whatever it is in a meeting or, but there are so many examples of, I agree, like little micro moments where it sends a message to a woman.
Yeah.
And at the other end of the spectrum, and we've all been in situations like this in, say, a meeting when there's a woman present and there's a few men and a woman, and the woman is just ignored and not looked at. So the opposite of what you were talking about before, which may seem strange to be like, don't look or do look. Like, I think it's just more thinking about how are your actions going to be perceived.
Oh, Jam and I literally not long ago, we went to a hardware store because she needed a certain wire. She needed this particular wire. We went to this hardware store in the country, and we went in, and she went up to the counter and spoke to the guy who worked there and said, "Yeah, hi, I'm looking for this particular wire. It's for this use. I forget what it was for. It was for this particular use." She did all the talking, and then he listened to her. Then literally, I'm not exaggerating, turned to me and answered. Like, I didn't say a word.
Yeah.
It gave me the answer of like what I should be looking for.
Yeah.
I mean,
it kind of all comes down to disrespect, I think. Like, maybe not. I'm sure it's much more complicated, but both of those, the overlooking and underlooking, are both just a complete disrespect of what my behavior is doing to that person. One of the things that I feel like maybe I didn't quite tell the full story of when Soph told me about what happened in Bondi Junction, that we briefly talked because we go to shopping centres like everyone else, and she was like, "Oh, it just makes me realise how much it, like how, as you were saying before, how lucky or unlucky, how much it comes down to luck, that kind of thing." And I agreed. I was like, yeah, it does. But I realised that we're actually making a very different calculation of luck in our heads there. That it's, I placed my level of luck in her. I assume that she was thinking the same thing of me, of like, yeah, you got to be pretty unlucky, and as a man, I'm like, you can be targeted by a terrorist attack or something like that. But her calculation of luck is vastly different because of what it's like to be a woman compared to me. And it was a failure of my own empathy to see that we were talking about two very different statistics in our head.
It's made me realise the fear that is the level of fear that's always sitting under the surface to be a woman. I feel like I didn't realise how real that was to me. But like, yeah, if you found yourself out at night late by yourself, you'd probably be quite fearful. But Penny was explaining, no, that's there all the time now, because there's been a lady murdered going for a run in the 9 o'clock in the morning. Someone else going for a walk at midday, and so that fear is always there. And how awful it is to live with that fear constantly, just throughout your entire life now.
Yeah, as we were talking about this earlier, we were saying that we don't, because I don't really speak to it with my male friends much, if at all. And I realised that maybe I was doing that. I mean, for me, it's like right or wrongly, and probably wrongly in my mind, I sort of saw it as like, well, what's the point? It's clearly appalling what's going on and clearly disgusting. But by not talking about it at all, it allows, there just needs to be more discussion about how appalling and how disgusting this is. I have no idea how to change the situation. I'm not an expert at anything really. But maybe out of this conversation, guys could be asking their mates or just talking about this, just putting it out there, how gross it is and how fucking appalling the situation is. And I know I'm going to go and, because we talked about this episode today, I haven't seen Sophie yet. I'll ask her tonight questions about this. How does it feel? Because I don't know enough.
Just on that, with men, well, I think that's a really important takeaway from today. I think every male should ask their partner how they feel right now. Give them a chance to talk about what they're feeling. So if you hadn't had the conversation, I found it really, I felt a huge amount of love and empathy for Penny talking about it and really understanding how she feels. So that's I think that's just, I think men should ask their partners how they're feeling right now. But just on the men talking about it, so we know that I think the study is 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence from at the hands of a male, which would suggest that in groups of men, there are quite a few men who are capable of that. And I just think creating a scenario where a man who potentially is committing these micro acts of aggression or worse, to have him with a group of people that he really loves talking about why they don't agree with it, why it's not good, sort of setting a better example to follow. I think that is really important as well.
And I think I might add that, like, it might sound paradoxical to offer support to men who are behaving poorly, but I think there needs to be a place for these discussions to be had where shame isn't layered on top, which will only make their behaviour worse and make the problem worse. So I know that might sound offensive to people who have been victims of appalling behaviour by men, but there needs to be a place where behaviour can change, and it can't really change from a place of shame.
It's also, I think, definitely, and almost to do the exercise for men listening, to do the exercise in your head of, like, imagine how you would feel. And the way to kind of think about that, which is what Bridge said to us before when we were talking, she essentially said, imagine there are thousands of crazed men out there who are targeting men. And so, like, no man is safe. So like there's this absolute situation going on that out in the streets of Australia, all around Australia, men are being targeted, being beaten, killed, raped. Like, imagine that is a thing that's happening. Then you kind of start to imagine how, like, imagine then I'm walking out here after this and I'm definitely worried.
Yeah.
I'm worried. I'm like looking around going like, okay, well, you're always making sure, okay, which path is safest for me? You're looking at all the men around you going like, okay, are they dangerous? Am I safe here? Is this street okay? Are there enough people here that, to constantly be thinking about that and that is the experience for women.
It's hard to begin to imagine what it feels like, but like half the population are feeling that right now. And then I think it's on the other half to really step up and do what they can to make them feel less alone and less scared at a time like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as Joshie said, it's always been like this.
And a lot of the times for women, it starts at such a young age. This is another thing I've spoken to Jam about a lot, and particularly since Me Too, which is that really hearing about, because as we know, these things can be generational, and kids, you can often learn behavior from your parents. It's often where you learn things from. And if you're, particularly like abuse, if your father was an abuser, there's probably a higher chance. I'm just anecdotal. I haven't got any research for that, but I'm assuming that it's like you just learn behavior, what's acceptable, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And Jam's told me stories about primary school when she was going out with a boy in primary school, and the boy dumped her and said to her, we've got to stop going out because you're too chubby right now. And that's, for him, he thinks that's an acceptable thing to say, and that she should look a certain way for him to be an acceptable suitor for him. The other thing she told me about was a friend of hers. Every day she came to school, and she was like considered, quote unquote, the hot girl at school. Every single day, all the boys, and this was like an everyday thing, all the boys would give her a rating out of 10 of how she looked that particular day. And that was like it wasn't like a secret thing. It was like a known thing that was like shared around. It's like, oh, she's a 7 today, or she's an 8. And it's just, it seems innocent to the boys at that age. And it seems like, oh, this is, but obviously if that's not caught, or if that's not told, if you're not told that is horrible at the time, you can see how that the opinion of women grows and grows and grows and gets worse and worse and worse. And just the way that men can end up degrading women can get really, really bad. But it does start very, very young a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's a great point, and so stunningly outlined in Chanel Contos's book that we had on the podcast. Her book, Consent Laid Bare, the introduction is basically examples from all the way from a young age up to elderly age, how women are treated by men and how it's the beginning of what she calls rape culture. We'll definitely put that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably also worth mentioning that the situation gets worse statistically if you are trans, a woman of colour, disabled,
Queer.
There's many people out there who have an added risk and calculation that goes on in their head.
I mean, if, like going a step back from the violent acts that are taking place, it's just I think recognising the privilege that we have as men. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I think of we had a discussion before when we were talking about having this chat with Bridget where we had Chanel Contos on talking about rape culture, and in the preparation for that interview, I had a long chat to Bridget about how I was feeling quite nervous about the conversation around rape culture when being from, a private school and then a sporting clubs that I've definitely been part of that rape culture as I discussed with Chanel, and I was talking about how nervous I was about that and how stressed I was about bringing that up and having that out there, not even realising that the very topic we were talking about, Bridge was so much more vulnerable to, for her as a female, she's a victim in this culture, and here's me worrying about what people might perceive of me.
Worried about getting cancelled.
Yeah, as opposed to saying, gosh, this must be, I mean, you're a part of this. This has happened to you your entire life and your entire career.
And as she pointed out, the odds of you getting cancelled over something that you haven't done is way, way less than the odds are of something actually happening, badly happening to her.
Yeah, which makes me just think, I mean, I like to think I'm reasonably self-aware with this stuff, but we've got a long way to go. We have got a long way to go. And I feel like our role as men is just to be really aware of what women are feeling right now in Australia and listening to them, really, really listening and being there whatever way we can for the people that we love, but also just the greater population. And we've obviously focused a little bit here on, because of the stats around being murdered by a partner or former partner, but I'm also thinking about like dating, like women who are out there dating. I've already thought about this for my 4-year-old daughter. I'm thinking, hang on a minute, you're going to go out with a man you've never met before at night time?
Yep.
What do you, no way.
No way.
That's it. That's dating is like.
It's been a long time since I've dated anyone, but thinking back on it now, it's nuts.
It is
just wild. I mean, I feel like because it's become like internet dating, which is really, I guess, the only dating, like the only way to meet people now. When it first started, seemed like wild that you would meet up with someone on the internet, just some random person that you've only chatted with. But now that's the normal thing and it's just become accepted. But yeah, when you think about it, it's just so terrifying.
It's a risk for the female, not a risk for the male.
Yep.
But the thing about the internet, what you said before is so true. I remember when like internet dating began and it was always like, oh, you don't know who you might be meeting up. That presupposes that you're able to tell who is a violent person from meeting them once at a bar.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is impossible to do anyway.
Yep, true.
So the whole thing is kind of, it's just a gamble from the start that men don't have to embark in. Yeah.
It's funny, and just even like talking about this now, I feel really nervous. Like I feel like kind of nervous talking about it, and I feel like, oh, I want to say the right thing. I don't want to offend, and I don't want to seem ignorant. And I'm like you're just saying, I'm worried about how, I'm worried about how I'll come across, or I'm worried about how, putting my foot in it, when that shouldn't be the thing that I'm worrying about. Like the problem is not how I'm being perceived. The problem is how women are being treated and killed and what is happening to women. Whereas maybe that is part of the problem, is that like I'm here talking about it and I'm worried how I'll be perceived in this conversation, let alone worried about, that's right now my primary fear is me not saying the right thing, when actually my primary fear should be the women in my life. But that's just, I guess, probably generally speaking, the selfishness of men, maybe in many ways.
It's pretty black and white. I think there are very few things in life that are this black and white. Like women are being murdered at a horrific rate, and we have stats for the amount of hospitalizations and for the amount of reported cases, but you speak to anyone who's worked in any area close to this, and they suspect that the amount of women who are being assaulted in relationships is so much higher than what's being reported. It's disgusting stuff, and it needs to be talked about more.
Yep.
By men.
By men,
There's
yeah.
only so much women can do in this conversation, I feel, and they have done everything they can. So, yeah, I agree. Anyway, we certainly weren't aiming to fix the problem in this conversation or come up with possible strategies. I think it's just ask the women in your life how they're feeling, have conversation with your male friends about this, because as Josh said, it has to stop.